welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 30, where we're going to be talking about a little deduction game about Shakespeare's shady lady, Black Sonata. But before we do that, let's do like we always do, and we'll start with the news. The first bit of news this week is not actually news in terms of like being something new, but it's new to me, and so I thought maybe it would be worth sharing. Joseph A. McCullough, who is the designer of a miniatures game called Frostgrave, is also the designer now of a game called Rangers of Shadow Deep. And the way his systems tend to work is he writes a set of rules for a minis game and puts them up like on DriveThruRPG or one of those websites where you can buy either a physical copy of the book or a PDF. You get your own minis and then you can play this game. Well, Frostgrave is a system that's become very well loved by a lot of people. And what he essentially does with Rangers of Shadow Deep is he takes that system that he developed in Frostgrave and turns it into a solo minis game, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I've never played any kind of game like that before. Have you?
No, I really haven't. I can't imagine exactly what that would feel like. I mean, based on what I could tell from the rulebook, the monsters, if they see you, just sort of automatically come toward you, make a beeline for you, which isn't as tactically rich probably as playing a miniatures game against somebody else.
Right.
Because probably that's not how minis games are played. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it does seem to have a lot of RPG type elements in it. There's a campaign with a story that you play through. You keep up character sheets. I don't know. It just seems like something very different and something that maybe a lot of people who are out there who have minis and have terrain might be interested in trying out for solo play.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess you would have to have a certain amount of minis in order to play a game like that.
Yeah, I think so. Based on what I can tell online, a lot of people don't have exactly the kind of monsters they're supposed to be fighting against, but they just proxy them with something else. So if you're willing to do that and you don't want to go out and spend a bunch of money to buy like fly monsters for one particular scenario or whatever, then I think you'll be okay. It could be a pretty good value.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in trying a solo minis game, check out Rangers of Shadow Deep, and you can find that on DriveThruRPG. The second bit of news we have for this week is from Van Ryder Games. They have a new expansion coming out for Hostage Negotiator called Career. And I have not played Hostage Negotiator, and you haven't either. Yeah?
Nope.
I have heard nothing but good things about this. Apparently, it's a dice-based game where you play as, a hostage negotiator trying to talk people down and save innocents who are being held hostage. That's a cool concept. A relatively small box game. This adds a campaign in this expansion, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, if you have the game and you like it and you just want to turn it up to 11, this sounds like a very cool addition to your collection. Check out Hostage Negotiator Career. The last bit of news for this week is kind of a strange one. So, Chip Theory Games, makers of games like Triplock and Hoplomachus, and recently they had the big hit game Cloudspire on Kickstarter, they put out an update video about Cloudspire, and in that video, they quote-unquote accidentally revealed their next Kickstarter, which is a new expansion for Too Many Bones. And you can only see part of the box cover art, or what we presume as the box cover art in the video, but it looks like it has the word splice in the title. And given that this is a game that has just buckets and buckets of dice, if they don't call the expansion Splice and Dice, I feel like it would be a real missed opportunity.
Right, yeah.
If you are interested at all in Too Many Bones and the systems that Chip Theory Games are famous for at this point, you definitely want to keep your eye out for more news about that. And as soon as we have more, we'll share it on this show. But that is Too Many Bones' upcoming Kickstarter from Chip Theory Games. And that's all the news we've got for you this week. So we're going to get right into our review, which is for Black Sonata. Black Sonata is a small box solo game from designer John Keane and publisher Side Room Games. It first came out in 2017 as a print and play title on Board Game Geek, and in fact was actually nominated for Best Print and Play Game of the Year, which is pretty cool. And it was picked up by Side Room Games, and it just came out a couple of months ago here in 2019 as a fully published official game. And what's really cool is this is a one-player only game, and we don't cover that many of those on this show. So Black Sonata is a small box deduction game where you're going to find yourself in Shakespeare's London, about 1600 AD, in pursuit of the Dark Lady, this mysterious figure who appears in several of Shakespeare's sonnets in real life, and whose identity remains shrouded in mystery still. So according to the sonnets, the Dark Lady seduced William Shakespeare and held him in this agonized thrall, while also conducting an affair with the fair youth whom Shakespeare also loved. You have to deduce this mysterious lady's location and then intercept her to try to catch a glimpse of her and gain a clue to her identity. And you win the game if you can figure out what 400 years of scholars have been unable to do, which is the identity of the Dark Lady. And that's the idea of the game. So we'll start as we always do with the components. And the components for this game are very simple because it's a small box experience, but I would say really solid.
Yeah, they're well done. I think it uses images of Shakespeare and associated people that you've probably seen in textbooks and things like that, or like old perspective maps of London.
Yeah, I mean, one side result of that is that there's a lot of beige in this game.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of that usually. I mean, actually, I would go as far as to say if I passed by this box cover on a shelf in a store, I would not give it a second look. It is an exceedingly boring box cover.
Yeah. It's a beige box that talks about Shakespeare. So, I mean, it seems really dry.
Yeah, it does seem very dry. I am happy to say that what's on the inside does look nice, though. I mean, even though it has a color palette that I'm not crazy about for the most part, the cards that are in the game are good quality. They're really stiff, thick cards with a nice finish on them. I was pleasantly surprised by that. It has a good insert that holds everything really well.
Mm-hmm.
And these cool little discs that are used to help you track your deductions on the game board, as well as these little cool black silhouettes that you can put on the board to track where the lady might be. I don't know. I feel like it's a really nice little package. Surprisingly so, especially from a relatively new publisher. I think this might be their first bigger release. I could be wrong about that, but even if it's not, I know they're relatively new, and I just feel like they did a very good job on the production for this game.
Yeah, I think it's just a nice little package that was put together well.
Yeah. The only other thing besides the color palette that I was a little unsure of is the game comes with tuck boxes, and they don't work super well. It's kind of hard to open them and close them. But the bigger thing is, it just doesn't need them.
Right. The tuck boxes sit in a tray that holds things well. So
yeah. So I just feel like I'm probably not going to keep using them. They just get in the way a little bit, but I mean, it's not a bad thing because it's not a necessary component, right? So it's not a loss to you exactly. But overall, I just thought the whole package was really nicely put together and enjoy that very much. And honestly, the same is true for the rulebook. It has a relatively short rulebook, pretty simple rules to get into the game. And I don't know, I breezed through it in no time. I felt like I understood the game pretty well.
Yeah, they're simple rules. I feel like it's easy to get through. And it also includes the little informational booklet, too, that's separate from the rules, just about some of the sonnets and background information about locations on the board and all that. I don't know. It's a neat little addition into the whole package.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that. I could not believe that in this little box, first of all, there was a board. I forgot to mention that in the initial talk of components, but it's rare to have a small box game that has a board, let alone a little Hobbit board like this one has, that I think is pretty cool and it looks really nice. But then to have two rule books in there also, at first I was thinking, oh man, what did I get myself into? But it's a really well researched and laid out little history of the scholarship that's gone into trying to figure out who the Dark Lady of Shakespeare's sonnets is. And it shows you examples of the different sonnets that we're talking about here when we talk about this subject and how they have connection to the different cities on the board. I don't know. I just think it does a really good job of helping to make the theme come alive for you. You know, I mean, it's a game with an interesting theme, which is one of my favorite things about this title, but it's not like it's a heavily thematic game. This really helps to bring it along a little bit.
Yeah, it's not heavily thematic. And also, while, I mean, I feel like most people know about Shakespeare, a lot of people haven't, I guess, been reading through the sonnets or I just don't know a lot of the little details. And that just helps fill in the gaps and I think just provides better context that makes the game a little bit more enjoyable and thematic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just very impressed with that 2 rulebook system. The rules are easy, and that leads into the play of the game, which again, is very kind of light and breezy in one sense. I mean, the game takes very little time to set up and to play. I think my plays of this were 30 minutes, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 30 minutes, I would say tops for me.
But the systems that exist here are really fascinating. This is one of the most cleverly designed games I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, it just has a really interesting, just how everything kind of comes together in place.
I mean, if you're like me, when I heard about this game, a solo deduction game, I wondered how that might be possible in a way that provides good replayability and is interesting for more than 3 or 4 times at the table. And what he's managed to do here is so clever because the game basically revolves around a few decks of cards. So you've got one deck that manages the Dark Lady's movement on the board. You're going to be looking at this map of London and trying to figure out where she might be so that you can confront her or get a glimpse of her and try to get some clues about her identity, because that's the goal of the game, is to try to figure out who the Dark Lady is. And the way that deck works that moves her around the board is just fascinating because it has these letters at the top and bottom of the cards that you have to put in alphabetical order. You cut the deck, and then every turn you're just going to flip up a card, and it has an icon on it that matches some of the cities on the board. And so you know when you flip that first card, okay, she's in a bar somewhere in the city, right? Mm-hmm. So there are 3 bars out here. You can put down little silhouette markers on the map that show you, okay, she's in one of these 3 places for sure. Well, then the next time she pulls a card, you know she's moved to an adjacent location on the map. So adjacent location she's moved to is a place that's maybe a church. Okay, well, that narrows it down to maybe 2 places that she could be right now. And the more of these cards you flip, and the more icons you see that show you different places on the map, you start to get a sense of where she might be, and you get to a point where you can either take a chance and try to confront her without knowing fully where she is, or you can wait until you have super solid information that she's definitely in this place and then try to confront her. And that decision is an interesting one because when you try to confront her, you're basically taking a card that is representative of the city, which has a little hole punched in the middle of that card or somewhere on the card, and you put it over the back of the location in the card that you just flipped. And if you can look through the hole on the location card and see a silhouette of a face in the hole, then you've found the Dark Lady in that city. That's hard to explain over audio, but basically it's meant to give you this feeling when you look at the card of peeping through a keyhole and catching a glimpse of this person just in passing almost. And it's not super thematic, right? Because nobody's going to go running around the city like peeping through keyholes to try to find out this person's identity. But it gives you this feeling of excitement when you flip over a card after you think you've nailed down her location and it turns out she's actually there and you unlock one of the clues to her identity. It's a very cool system.
It's just a really neat way to reveal that into, like, I guess just manage, is she at this location or a different one, and just using the holes and flipping over all of it. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a cool, exciting way to do that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I see and I think, first of all, how has nobody ever done this before? And then at the same time think, what kind of brain do you have to come up with all of this? It's a really clever design for working out a solo deduction game. And, there are going to be times when you peep through that keyhole and she's not there and it's frustrating, but it's also dramatic in its own way, I guess. Mm-hmm. And this game does a good job of mixing deduction with the drama and thrill of trying to chase somebody down. So it's a good combo of those 2 things. And one of the other interesting things about trying to make that decision of whether to search or not is whenever you do, you have to take what's called a fog card from another deck that you put out at setup and put it down in place of the location card that you're investigating this round. And that's important because if you ever run out of fog cards to put into her movement deck, then you lose the game. And that means then you kind of want to be sure of where she is before you search to try to get a clue, because the more of these fog cards you have in your deck, the quicker you cycle through it. If you cycle through this deck 2 or 3 times, you're done and the game is over. So the game incentivizes you to, on the one hand, be sure that you know where she is before you make a guess. But on the other hand, you're still cycling through your deck no matter what. And so you're also being incentivized to take a little bit of a risk now and then. Mm-hmm. I just find that push your luck element to be a very fascinating way to handle a deduction game.
Yeah, it's really cool. And just the fact that you're replacing one of those, I guess, those cards where it says where she's at, you're replacing it with a fog card. So now it's a little bit harder to find her because that's one movement space that you don't really know where she's at, but she's still moving along a set path.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating cat and mouse kind of feel that it creates over the course of the game. And there is a lot of randomness in trying to figure out where she's going to move on the board. And there will definitely be times when you play this game, or at least there were for me, where it felt like, oh, okay, she's here. I think I've got it. I'm going to move over to where I think she is. Oh no, it turns out she's actually some other place on the board that's much further away from me. Now I've got to spend another 3 turns getting closer to her. That can definitely happen. And it doesn't feel great, but I didn't find that it happened all that often.
Yeah, I guess when it happened, it seemed fine, and I learned something and possibly picked up more locations, which can be beneficial to you in the later on in the game. So yeah, I don't know. It seemed like a good kind of, I guess, ebb and flow of getting it right and not.
Yeah, I felt that way as well. And so overall, I think that's a good thing, that you've got this drama of chasing her around the city. You're trying to look for clues that can help you to unlock this hidden card that's hidden from the beginning of the game, which shows her true identity. And the game also incentivizes you to visit every location in the city because there's one clue card that you can only unlock if you visited every location on the board. And that is interesting because there are a number of times when I felt like, okay, she might be right here and I might be able to run into her and get a clue, but I really need to visit this other city down here. And I've had no reason to go there so far, and it doesn't look like I'm going to get over there anytime soon unless I just choose to go. So if I go right now, I know I can unlock a clue card. I don't know. It's just one extra thing to think about during the course of the game in a nice way. I found that to be a good addition to the game without adding, a bunch of stuff to keep track of or whatever. The coolest part for me, though, is when it comes down to actually solving the lady's identity. You have these clue cards, and on the clue cards, they show you different symbols, which tells you something about the lady's identity. One of the 3 is true, or none of them is true, or 2 of them are true, which is kind of an interesting thing for you to have to deduce. If you have just one clue card, you can't figure out the Dark Lady's identity. It's not possible. But once you get up to maybe 4, that's when it starts to become possible for you to guess who it might be. And I thought that based on the relatively simple deduction that goes into figuring out where the lady is on the board, I guess I thought that the final deduction would be pretty simple as well. But it's a pretty solid brain-burning kind of puzzle.
Yeah, it's nice just like being able to lay out the cards, kind of logically comparing them and trying to figure out, okay, well, if this is that. And it's like because you have these little wooden tokens and you can flip them over to just represent possible traits that the Dark Lady has or not, you can just kind of work it out and be like, okay, well, I can eliminate these and I still have this pool. And so when you get new clue cards, figuring out, I don't know, it's just a nice kind of ongoing you piecing together this mystery.
Yeah, it is. And I found that most of the time when I got to that point where I felt like I could probably solve it, I would spend maybe 5 minutes or so trying to figure out which of these icons or traits for the Dark Lady can I eliminate. And you get to a point where you think, I don't have enough clues. And then something clicks in my brain that I hadn't considered before. And then in another 3 or 4 minutes, I've got it. The game does sort of work its way from this cat and mouse game to a place where you're basically sitting at your table staring at 4 cards trying to figure out what the final solution is to this puzzle. That's not a bad thing for me at all. I actually really like that kind of logical deduction. But you just probably need to know the final puzzle is a bit more intense than what I expected.
It didn't seem as intense to me. That might have just been, in my playthroughs, just the way it came out. Yeah, I don't know, but it was a nice, it was a puzzle that seemed, or solvable, as I got further in the game, but I wasn't going to have to be, stressed about it, or it wasn't, agonizing. It was just an enjoyable amount of thinking.
Yeah, I don't think it's a brain burner. It has moments of that, I suppose, when you're really trying to work through all the different possibilities, but overall, it's still a light game, for sure. But it has this quality of being a game that feels like a full, rich game experience, but in a small box, takes 30 minutes to play, very quick to set up and tear down, and a good insert, which makes all of that even easier to manage. And I just felt very satisfied every time I finished playing this.
Yeah, it feels like a complete game. I don't know how else to, like, it seems balanced. It doesn't seem, I mean, it's on the lighter side, but it seems like a full experience.
Yeah, it's a full experience and one that's just so cleverly designed and different from anything else I've played.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many solo deck builders out there and solo minis games, and that's fine. I like deck builders. I like minis games, but this is cool. It's really cool to see a solo deduction game that works, that's portable. And I mean, I played it probably 4 times in one day, just when I first got it and tried it out. I was really excited by it. I mean, I still am excited by it, but I rarely play games back to back that many times. But it was so quick and easy. It has almost an addictive quality, especially those first few games when I was losing every time.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. I feel like the first couple of times it's easy just to keep doing it back to back.
Yeah. It's rare that a game has that effect on me nowadays, especially because so many of them are so much longer. I don't know. This is something really special. The system that John Keane has come up with for creating a deduction game that plays solo and works well is very cool. And the movement system for the Dark Lady is very cool. Printed on the cards themselves, there are 8 different combinations of ways you can construct the movement deck in the first place. Plus, you always cut the deck. So there's going to be a different movement pattern every time, so that's not going to get stale at all. But beyond that, the rulebook includes this whole section on different deck combinations that work just fine so that the path isn't ever broken. That's kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah, it does have a lot in it, and it's an easy setup just using the cards and organizing how it tells you to. But the fact there's all of these additional paths that you can take if you really just want to start adding variety. And it tells you a difficulty, whether it's very easy or it's a medium or more difficult one, which is nice.
Yeah, it is very nice. So the replayability for this is very high just with that alone. But then there's also a slightly harder variant of this where you can build the movement deck in such a way that sometimes the Dark Lady moves on the next turn and other times she'll just stay right where she is, which really complicates things. Because in the base game, she's going to move every turn to an adjacent city. When you kick it up to a harder difficulty, she might just stay put, and that really throws a wrench in your logic plans. So, I don't know. I didn't know what to expect when we were contacted about reviewing this game. I knew that I really liked the theme because I just think it's very cool that somebody would try to make a game about William Shakespeare and about this one weird aspect of his life that's puzzled academics for a long time. That's a great idea for a game theme, but I just didn't know how it would play. I wanted a solo deduction game to work, but I just didn't imagine how that could be possible.
Mm-hmm.
I was really bowled over by this whole experience.
Yeah.
It's an incredible game, and really that brings us to the good, bad, and ugly of this review. And the good for me in this game is that it's a small box solo deduction game with a ton of replayability. And so if that's something that you're looking for, this is the best example of that I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's a cool deduction game that I really like. And I feel like there are like small box games that feel like this has just been like a minified version of a bigger type, a bigger style game, like, some kind of Civilization or Building or something like that. But I don't know, it just feels very complete in and of itself. It's just enjoyable for what it is. I like Shakespeare and 17th century British literature, and so that's also appeals to me a lot, and just that there's a theme around that. But yeah, I don't know. It's a cool little game.
Yeah, and not only that it has a cool theme, but that even though it's not highly thematic in a lot of ways because it's a deduction game where you're trying to figure out where somebody is on the map, it makes you feel tension and makes you feel excitement in a way that sucked me in a way that made me feel like, yeah, I'm searching for the Dark Lady's identity. I don't know. I was pulled into this game in a surprising way. And for me, that definitely goes into the good category because that doesn't happen to me all that often.
Mm-hmm.
It stopped feeling like moving pieces on the board after a while. And that's fantastic. If there's anything bad to say about this game, the color palette for me is pretty unexciting.
Yeah, it is thoroughly bland.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense with the artwork that they've chosen, the more historical, the social studies and literature book kind of pictures. Mm-hmm. So I get that because it all needs to work together in a way that those don't stick out and clash. But it's not that inviting to look at it on the shelf.
No.
Once you get it to the table, it's fine. The pieces are solid, but the color palette is one thing that I would say, wish they could just punch it up just a little bit. And the only other negative thing I would say is that sometimes the luck can be a little too much where you just feel like, okay, it's been 6-7 turns and I haven't been able to do anything cool.
Yeah, except just move around and keep choosing the wrong place.
Yeah, absolutely. But otherwise, that's it. I mean, that doesn't happen that often. I don't have any other bad things to say about the game, and I don't have any ugly things to say about it at all.
Oh yeah, nothing.
This is an excellent game. This has been the biggest surprise for me in the last year or so. Most of the games that we've played and liked, I kind of know going into it I'll probably like. I mean, sometimes I'm surprised by how let down I am.
Right.
Yeah, feudum. But it's pretty rare that I go into a game and just really genuinely grab by it in a way I didn't expect. And yeah, Black Sonata definitely does that for me. I really love this game. I've played it several times already. It feels different and engaging every time. And I plan to play it many more times moving forward.
Yeah, I would definitely play this game again. And I can't say that about a lot of solo games. Even if it was a good experience, it's nothing that I really want to play again. But this would be something I would easily get out. Just had 30 minutes, wanted to do something that was enjoyable or engaging, but not too challenging. I don't know. It's a great game. Yeah, absolutely. And so this is going to be a game that gets the stamp of approval from us. I really love this game. I'm just so surprised by it and enthralled with it right now that I just want to keep checking it out. Yeah, I really like it a lot. And while it's not this huge, super deep game with layers and layers of complexity, for what it is for a small box game, it hits what it is, or the genre, or weight class it is, trying to be so well in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. In some ways, I think big box games have a harder time getting a stamp of approval from us.
Definitely.
Just because if you're going to go through all the work of learning the rules and setting it up and getting it to the table, it needs to be something really special, you know? And there are games that do that for sure. We've given out the stomp to some really big games and that are fantastic. But small box games do have a little bit of an easier time, I think, because the footprint is smaller. You don't have to go back and read through a 50-page rule book to refamiliarize yourself before you play it again. But the problem with small box games for me is they often feel like less than a full experience. Games like that are often fillers for me. They're not destinations. This is a destination game. It's light and relatively easy to play, but it feels full and satisfying, and man, it's just so good. And there's nothing else like it out there. There's definitely nothing like it in your collection.
Right.
So if you haven't checked out Black Sonata from Side Room Games, you definitely should. It's very surprising, rewarding solo experience. I just thoroughly enjoy it. And yeah, it gets the stamp of approval from us. Yeah, and that's all we've got for you this episode. If you like this podcast and you want to find other great podcasts out there about board games, check out the Dice Tower Network. We are a member of that network, and you can go to thedicetower.com and see all the other shows that are out there in the network and find the next show that you'll love. So check that out when you get a chance. Also, go and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can see what we're playing or what games have just arrived, or talk with us on there. That's a great way to keep in touch with what we're doing. You also can send us an email if you have a question or you just want to talk with us a little bit. Our email address is solosauruspodcast@gmail.com. If you send us a really good question, we might feature it on the show. So send us a message if you've been thinking up a question for us. Also, if you haven't yet done so, please go to iTunes and rate or review the show. That goes a long way toward helping other people find us and learn about solo games, and that's something we're really excited to see happen. So go and rate us or review us on iTunes and tell one of your friends about the show. Get them interested in it too. And that's all we've got for this episode, though. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.